Okay, let's start. So, thank you for all participants to this panel. As you know, International Disaster Risk Conference holds the third session, annual one, and we are very happy to be with you today. And we will talk about the resilience from the perspective of climate adaptation. And my name is Nuri Özbağdatlı, and I'm working for UNDP as Climate Change and Environment Portfolio Manager in Turkey. And today we will have really a great speakers that will share knowledge and experience from the perspective of climate adaptation and resilience part. And first, I would like to share the frame of this session, which really focusing on the resilience part, but how to make it within the context of climate adaptation, because as we all know, we have been facing multiple risks and in a very complex dynamic system. And all these risks has been interrelated somehow and has different impacts at different scale and for different vulnerable groups, and also especially and temporarily it makes a risk for the sustainable development goals. And when we see the sustainable development goals, it has a really kind of systemic way that coming from the biosphere, where the natural system feeds the human-made system. And without a resilient nature, we cannot go for a sustainable society, resilient economy, and of course, we cannot go for peace at global level. So today we will speak about nature-based solutions and the role of nature on adaptation and resilience. And then we will talk about the role of the communities within this picture. And then we will discuss how this mainstreaming into national policies from climate to security and resilience. And we will hear approach from UNDP at global and regional level. And then we will hear Professor Nakabayashi giving a presentation about disaster recovery, urban planning, and urban disaster prevention. And then we would like to see your questions to enrich this communication. And hopefully we will finish at 3 p.m. Turkey time with a great interaction. And first, I would like to give a brief about the speakers we have today, because we have a very rich speakers, and I will give more time for them to introduce themselves. But first, we will start with Ben Smith, and he is a kind of celebrity. He's an award-winning environmental consultant, and he's working about the consultancy projects for public and private sector. And for last decade, he's mainly working on local and city governmental administrations. And he will really give us his message to us how to better connect climate and nature. Then we would like to continue with John Robb Poole. John will be a little bit late, but then he will talk about what Cities for Forest is, because he is the implementation manager of Cities for Forest. It's an initiative for raising awareness and catalyze actions at the city residents and city governments for better conserve, restore, and manage trees and forests. And then we will have Stanislav Kim. Stanislav will talk about the UNDP's climate and disaster risk reduction issues and link the issues with the security and resilience risks. And Meral Özler, also from UNDP regional team on nature, climate, and energy, will give us the UNDP's approach for climate change and resilience. And Professor Itsuki Nakabayashi, he's an emeritus professor and has nearly 40 years of extensive expertise in urban disaster prevention and disaster recovery and urban planning. And his speak will really give us a better understanding about global warming and compound disasters. Professor Isuki Nakabayashi will make his speech in Japan, and it will be translated from Japanese to English and Turkish. And other colleagues here will speak in English, and it will be also translated into Turkish. So for the participants, please pay attention. You choose the translation from the icon that you can see like a world, and you need to choose the language you prefer. So with this small introduction, first I would like to give floor to Ben about his speech, and then we will move from nature through to forests, through to communities, and then the policymaking. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Nuri, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, today I really want to just mention 3 projects that I've worked on in the last few years and that have really inspired me. And I will connect those projects together in my speech through the lens of climate adaptation and the connection to nature. So for my job, I go to different cities around the world and I help them to develop climate action plans and strategies, focusing both on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also on adapting to the shocks and stresses that we'll see from the future climate, many of which Nuri spoke about: urban heat, flood, water scarcity, and so on. And one of the things that I noticed probably 10 years ago now is that the number of actions in these plans, which at their core are just about reintroducing nature to the urban environment. Because actually, if you're leaving spaces in urban settings for nature, you are creating areas that can store floodwater, can provide cooling for people to shelter under when it's really hot, and also provide really fantastic places for people to meet and for communities to gather, better opportunities for play, and so on. So I was just seeing over and over again all these strategies that so many of the actions were about nature, and yet those actions weren't getting the same level of attention or profile that some of the other actions relating to renewable energy or sustainable mobility were getting. And similarly, they weren't necessarily getting the same level of investment either. So in 2015, I saw a man speaking about a new initiative in London called the National Park City. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. Why are we not celebrating nature in urban settings as we do in rural, more natural settings? Why do we not think of nature in cities in the same way that we do in the countryside? And so in 2014, 2015, we had this idea, let's declare London as the world's first national park city. Not a designation or a planning status, but a place where we celebrate the green and natural environment within the city. And we had a 6-year citizen-led campaign to make the case to declare that London could be this national park city. We had support from businesses, politicians, charities. We set out a vision for what the greener city in London might look like. We had started to build a movement of people that could help to change the city, to make it more green, to integrate more green space into new development and so on. And in 2019, with the help of the London Mayor, we had a big party and declared that this was the first national park city in the world, and it created a roadmap for other cities to follow. So just this year, we have launched a journey book for other cities wanting to become national park cities. And we have now interest from 30 other cities around the world wanting to do the same thing. it is about making more of the city green, connecting more people to nature, which we think has knock-on benefits in terms of their environmental behavior. If you're out in nature and you're growing food, you're less likely to waste food, for example. So yeah, 30 cities now coming forward along that same journey. And that is very much about setting a vision at the city level, right? So it's about making sure that the mayor's plans and strategies have adopted this new way of speaking. It's about driving investment into the city to make projects happen. But the change doesn't happen at the whole city level at one time. It happens through individual projects and through individual interventions. And that is why I'm now going to talk about another project, which is a project we've just finished working on with C40 cities, and it's called Green and Thriving Neighborhoods. So despite my plea to conserve and enhance nature in cities, I am also a realist. Development has to happen, cities change over time. Where we're doing large scale, neighborhood scale, district level development, we have more of an opportunity than we maybe do if we're doing individual one building at a time type development. So the Green and Thriving Neighborhoods Guidebook sets out a roadmap for neighborhoods, and this could be existing neighborhoods that are already in a city or new planned development, to think about how they deliver net zero and at the same time create a thriving place. And when we talk about net zero, we are setting a very bold ambition around reducing the operational energy use, reducing the embodied carbon in the development, and then thinking about consumption and how people live and the choices that they make, which links back to my point earlier about local production of food and being more engaged in the environment that is around you in your local area. As well as this, these three areas of focus on the first pillar, which is about zero carbon, we have a second pillar which contains 10 design approaches to create a thriving neighborhood. And surprise, surprise, one of these is about urban greening, making sure there's enough green space for people to be able to recreate, play, grow, and just enjoy the intrinsic value of the natural setting. So I would encourage you to take a look at that guidebook. It sets out a process and provides case studies from cities all around the world where you can see these types of green and thriving neighborhoods starting to emerge. And you can see the unique and individual approaches that they've taken to the challenges that they have, new models, new ways of doing things, new investment decisions, and so on. So it's a very useful resource. And if that is, I talk first about intervention at the city level, a policy, strategy, vision. Then I talked about what you can do at a neighborhood level, be that existing or new. And now I want to talk about the third project, which has also inspired me, where I think there's a huge opportunity in cities all around the world, but where this project I'm talking about happened in London also. And we called it meanwhile use. So what I mean by meanwhile use is when you have an area of land in a city that is being redeveloped or is redundant or derelict, so nothing is happening there, but there is a plan to change that in 5, 10, 15 years' time with a new development. What happens in that place in that 5, 10, 15 years while you're waiting? And what can you do in that space that will be better for the city in the meantime or in the meanwhile? So we started to do a piece of work in London where we looked around the city for all the different places, land, buildings, public space, privately owned space, where there is just redundant pockets of land, doing nothing, providing no value to the communities that are around it, because there's a long-term plan to do something there which will generate income, revenue for the landowner. But what sort of things could you do in the meantime? Could you create places that activated the community, where you had allotments, where people could grow food, where they could play? Could you have children's play spaces here? How do you fund those types of interventions? Or in the case of buildings that are perhaps old office buildings or commercial establishments, could you turn those buildings into charitable spaces where new startups could use those spaces to develop environmentally sustainable businesses? I think when you start to look around in your neighborhoods where you live, wherever you live in the world, and I can't speak for every place, but I've visited quite a few cities, you'll find on street corners and in neighborhoods, these areas that are just not being put to very good use. And when you start to think, well, how could I do something different and better? It's quite interesting. Who owns the site? Who do you need to connect with? Who has an idea? Which charity might you partner with to make that site activated, and for what benefit? How would you measure that benefit? And most importantly, because it is a meanwhile use, so it won't be used in that way forever, how do you manage the transition back to that site then being developed along its original intent or original plan? So you need to engage with the community to say, this is a space that is vacant for 10 years. This is an opportunity. Here are some partners. This is what we could do in this space for 10 years. And then how do you then tell the community, now the 10 years is finished, we're going to move somewhere else for this activity while this site is redeveloped to create a new development, housing, commercial, or whatever. So I think this is close to my 15 minutes. And I guess I really wanted to just use my time today to just mention these 3 initiatives, these 3 projects that I'm pretty passionate about. I can share more information to where the resources for those are, if you're interested and you want to take a look. But just to really say that, so much of the response, in my opinion, around climate change is about making people understand better the connection between the climate and the natural environment. And that is needed to be worked on at every level, from government through policymakers, in communities and neighborhoods, right down to the individual. And we've seen that in lockdown, how much, and I know, lockdown has been different in different parts of the world, different experiences, but for many of us working from home, the ability to get out and get somewhere where you can take some time away from the screens, it's so important. And I think more than ever now, we're starting to realize those connections. And you may have seen in the UK, but it's a global competition, the Earthshot Prize being advertised in the last few weeks, really starting to now make the point about the interconnectedness between climate and nature. So I won't talk for much longer, but just that was the points I wanted to get across today. If anyone would like those resources, I'm happy to share them with you all, of course. Thanks for having me.
Great, Ben. Thank you very much. I have several questions, and one will be about the community engagement, of course. But before going with the questions, which will be wrap up at the end, I would like to remind all the participants here, please ask your questions through the chat or through Q&A part, while you have the opportunity to directly communicate with the great people here. And then maybe you can also just, put the links in the chat for the issues you would like to raise. And while we wait for John Rapp, maybe we better to continue with Carmen, because the question that I had in my mind directly linked with what Carmen is doing, the role of the communities in these really resilience issues at the urban level. So Carmen, would you like to join and jump in?
Sure, thanks so much. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm an architect, urban designer, but I'm a professor at UIC Barcelona. I direct for many years a master's in emergency architecture. So thanks for the invitation to participate in the panel. I bring to the table basically my academic experience and work on knowledge transfer projects developed through this line on emergency architecture at UIC Barcelona. And I wanted to introduce, as you said, the perspective of the strategic value of spatial and cultural resources in order to reinforce local identity and community engagement for post-disaster reconstruction, which is what I've been working in the past 10 years. And reinforce that communities have critical roles to play within urban reconstruction and climate action adaptation perspectives. Communities' critical role include, but are not limited to, as they're very wide, they contribute to more inclusive and just cities by challenging and offering alternatives to dominant vested interests, and enhancing resilience of individuals, groups, and neighborhoods through learning, redundancy, self-reliance, and increasing adaptive capacities. Therefore, we believe that there's a need to implement and understand culturally based approaches which embody traditions and practices regarding risk reduction and related to climate change adaptation. This perspective is necessary in order to create disaster awareness, as it is important to study community resilience linked to reconstruction, and we believe it's a very necessary complement to the adaptability of built structures. Graham Saunders, which is a good friend, a great humanitarian architect, and he was head of shelter and settlements of IFRC, who unfortunately passed away, used to say that, and I'll quote him, "The challenge for professionals, national and local, not only international, is how to engage with the majority of construction that happens as non-engineered structures and informal, unplanned settlements. This is where the major risks and vulnerabilities are." What he's talking about and what we think is important is that this capacity is the one that needs to be developed to achieve safer buildings and reconstruction processes and awareness. In other words, the first and utmost requirement is that local communities in affected regions be seen as active collaborators rather than helpless aid relief beneficiaries. Hence, our work must be to create opportunities for capacity building so that local professionals can assume complex processes as a priority to be addressed before disasters take place. Likewise, one of the major challenges of the built environment professionals is that we have to create the creation of knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing, and how do we translate it into local building codes or reconstruction plans in disaster-prone countries in order to introduce better and safer repair processes. We definitely must aim to promote the uniqueness of a place, and by doing this, keep its culture alive. With this, I mean our drivers to create resilience and to adapt to disaster is to work with the causes, the history, and the culture in which we intervene. From our experience, the local culture will facilitate work, or on the contrary, will inhibit it if our work is countercultural. So the question that has guided our research is how to integrate attention to community resilience in urban reconstruction strategies in post-disaster situations. And from our experience working on reconstruction projects, and it's basically in Latin America, I'm originally from Latin America, though I live for 27 years now in Barcelona, in Latin America and also in other countries, is we've narrowed it down to two main objectives that have to be followed. The first is that we must implement and understand culturally based approaches which embody traditions and practices regarding risk reduction. And the second is to study community resilience linked to reconstruction as a necessary complement to the adaptability of built structures or urban structures or systems. And with this objective in mind, what we've done throughout these years is a methodology which intervenes through the following correlated tasks. First, we identify cultural, physical, and social traits and incorporate them. And we find that they're very important in urban disasters. Second, identify local systems of management and decision-making in order to develop the reconstruction, always keeping in mind that we are incorporating the community perspective. Ensure the capacity development and knowledge transfer is implemented as part of the repair process. And we implement what we call the design of a civic network that integrates spatial places of civic use as part of the repair process. In certain areas that are informal, these spatial places can be just voids but they have community ties because people use them, recognize them. And I like to use the phrase, the word repair, because we're not just talking about physical reconstruction, but also repairing social ties and community through these community spaces. Finally, what we found very useful is to, after doing this mapping or understanding, is to develop certain strategic urban projects related to the repair and the community's empowerment as the guideline, a bit of a catalyst effect after when we identify these spaces. And obviously, what's very singular of our architectural background is that we think of a participatory process with the community. This is not taught usually in our profession, how to incorporate this layer of the community's experience as part of the design process. So through our work, we have discovered that when a sense of place is reinforced in the efforts to reduce disaster risk and recovery from disaster, the possibility for autonomy will emerge. Despite the fact that we're implementing technical top-down concepts or technical design concepts. Therefore, we must establish a relationship which is not of dominance or imposition. Furthermore, I just wanted to end saying that we want to stress that working technically is vital, as well as acknowledging that local communities need active support in devising their own recovery and in building a safe and efficient manner. I think despite the fact that most of the reports, manuals, et cetera, in the past have rooted for standardization, they have served their objective of installing safe construction parameters in order to ensure that vulnerability is not rebuilt. But now I think one of the lessons that have been learned and recent reports from NGOs acknowledge the failure of culturally alien guidelines and enhance context adapted, situated solutions. And they proclaim that assessment is the foundation for appropriate response, both for housing and urban areas. It has been clear that the most important factors for recovery are not to find appropriate technical answers, but to adjust to existing local, social, technical, and financial organizational capacities. So finally, through our research throughout these years, we emphasize that needs assessment need to include capacities assessment. In other words, reconstruction projects must build on a change of perspective achieved by understanding situated social and physical strengths and dynamics as the key ethical approach to design in the humanitarian field. I think it's important that if we are able to understand the place before a disaster occurs, obviously we'll respond better to disasters. I don't want to go on much more. I don't know how long I've been talking, but this is basically the nutshell of our research and our background. And so I'll be happy to answer questions, etc. Thanks.
Wow, Carmen, I mean, it's really interesting. Frankly talking, when Ben talks, it is more, easier to grab for me because I have a, nature background. But when you talk with the culture and, these issues are more, higher dimension at the value part. So I think it is very interesting how and what you do, especially when you make some, development or climate resilient projects, you should not rebuild the vulnerabilities. And it's amazing. And I'm sure that we will have some questions. And I would like to continue with John to really put the first, let's say, biggest pie of the SDGs, the biosphere and nature part. But I need the IT guys to assign John Robb as a panelist. So John is online here, and colleagues in APAT, can you please assign him as a panelist so John Robb can share his speech. So please, let's give them some minutes. And John, I'm sure that you hear us and you are getting more exciting to share your part. And yes, now here you are, John. Hi, John. And we started with the, really great information with Ben on National Park City, the world's first national park city. And then we heard about really great ideas, and there's a guidebook. And Carmen put another layer on that with really, community part and culture part. So let's continue with you. And I tried to give a little brief information about you, that you are the implementation manager of Cities for Forest. And maybe you can put the nature-based part and forest part on to this discussion. And then we will move with UNDP colleagues and then the Professor Nakabayashi. And welcome.
Thank you so much, Nuri. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Great. Thank you so much for this invitation to present here. And hello, colleagues. Thanks so much for being on this panel. Today, I'm excited to talk a little bit about our experience from the World Resources Institute and the Cities for Forests program. And so the key message that I want to give is that forests and nature-based solutions, of which forest conservation and forest restoration is one, really do hold a lot of promise for adaptation and resilience in cities. Given that this conference is the third International Disaster and Resilience Congress, I thought I would actually center my remarks on the role of nature-based solutions for natural hazards and disaster risk management. To kind of set the scene, and I do apologize that I arrived some 20 minutes late and may have mixed up the order here, Nuri. But if we go back a few minutes, disaster risk management, right, is linked to a variety of natural hazards, many of which are manifesting themselves at the city level these days. This includes coastal flooding and erosion, urban flooding, stormwater hazards, riverine flooding, landslides, droughts. And when we think about these, we think about huge impacts, both economically, both in terms of livelihoods, socially, and environmentally for the majority of the world's population, more than half of the world's population now living in urban systems. So if we think about coastal flooding and erosion, coastal ecosystems such as mangroves, coral reefs, sand dunes, as nature-based solutions can protect communities by acting as a buffer against sea level rise, protecting against erosion and storm hazards that bring intense wind, rainfall, waves, and so on. If we think about urban flooding and stormwater hazards, constructing wetlands, open spaces, bioretention areas, they can all absorb runoff and reduce the volume of water which enters built stormwater systems and therefore prevents intense flooding events. Flooding and stormwater pollution are also actually very problematic in urban areas with, a lot of impervious surfaces, those that don't allow the infiltration of water into the ground, and aging water infrastructure like combined sewer and stormwater systems. When we think about riverine flooding, the restoration of floodplains and riparian areas that dissipate flood energy and reduce peak flows and store water for slow release, is a big opportunity for cities to take advantage of. And when we think about landslides, which primarily occur when heavy rains destabilize soil, nature-based solutions that again reduce peak flow and hold soil in place can curtail landslide risks. And when we think about droughts, nature-based solutions can be leveraged to maintain and increase water retention capacity of soil to combat drought conditions. And restoring watersheds through reforestation and landscape restoration, sustainable agroforestry can all enhance aquifer recharge while targeting landscaping practices like contour trenching that help, capture rainfall and nourish crops for a longer period of time. So that's just a little highlight about the role of nature-based solutions to address some of the disaster risks that we face in cities these days. But let me set the context. Without this, what is the cost, right? The cost of inaction is that there are hugely disproportionate consequences. We know that climate change is caused by many cities that actually don't feel many countries that actually don't feel the biggest impacts of climate change, and that the negative impacts of climate change are actually falling disproportionately on the world's most vulnerable communities. Not only do disasters like the ones that I've mentioned harm disadvantaged communities more, they also roll back the progress that we have been slowly enjoying on fighting poverty over the last 30, 40, 50 years. 9 out of the 10 most vulnerable cities to flooding are in lower and upper middle income countries, which may struggle to bounce back from costly natural disaster events. And furthermore, urban expansion in developing countries is often unplanned, unsanctioned. It occurs on floodplains, on hillsides, on riverbanks, other steep slopes, and other high-risk areas, which essentially just exacerbates risks of these populations living in these areas. And in addition to disproportionate consequences, there are costly consequences. So what we can expect is an increasing occurrence of water resource challenges, especially as cities develop in places that put them in harm's way. And as disaster risks grow, so do the expected costs of the damages. Regarding watershed degradation, for example, the impacts, this impacts drinking water for more than 700 million people and costs global cities around $5.4 billion in water treatment annually. That's according to McDonald et al. 2016. The occurrence of floods is most frequent amongst all natural disasters, and the risk of flood events is increasing, along with the number of people affected and the cost of damages. Total flooding losses are actually exceeding $40 billion in exceptional years, such as 1998, 2010. And we can only expect those to increase with frequency, with severity, and of course, in terms of cost in the future. And so when we think about solutions, we should consider the role of nature-based solutions, or what we can also term green infrastructure. Green infrastructure complementing the role of traditional gray built concrete, hard infrastructure. Those are all terms for, the traditional infrastructure that we have in our cities. And we should really start thinking about solutions being either a hybrid between built and green infrastructure or completely natural systems. And this is where nature-based solutions come in. When we think about conventional infrastructure, I mentioned we can call this hard engineering, gray infrastructure. This utilizes man-made structures for, controlling natural processes, such as treating polluted water, capturing and channeling stormwater after an excessive rainfall event. And the issue with pure built infrastructure is that it currently doesn't meet basic needs in many parts of the world, including in our cities. Rapidly rising populations, urbanization that I mentioned earlier, the impacts of climate change are further exacerbating the challenges that we face with our gray infrastructure around the world. And so when we think about the role of nature-based solutions, for hybrid or green infrastructure, it's important to note that nature-based solutions take many forms, right? They allow, which is a beautiful thing for us. It allows for broad application of nature-based solutions in areas of different sizes and states of development. And nature-based solutions can be a complementary measure because they enhance the performance and resilience of built infrastructure. And in many cases, they are more cost-effective due to lower construction and establishment costs, and their capacity to adapt to future conditions related to climate change and to regenerate naturally after disasters, of course, which gray infrastructure is not able to do. And although nature-based solutions are newer and not as well tested or established as built infrastructure approaches, they are multi-purposed and they provide various co-benefits, such as improving food security, sequestering carbon, providing livelihoods, and so on. So they don't only mitigate the impact of disasters, but provide a whole suite of co-benefits that cities and people who live in cities can take advantage of. And so, to move on, I wanted to mention a little bit about the key considerations for nature-based solutions. I mentioned earlier that they're multifaceted, and that helps them to be applicable in a range of contexts and development states. The reason that nature-based solutions are so multifaceted is because they are based on natural systems, and natural systems possess an inherent variability, right? And so nature-based solutions possess that as well. And accordingly, they must be tailored according to location, site context, project parameters, and so on. So when we think about nature-based solutions, we should always consider the site context within which we want to apply them, the main driving factor that we want nature-based solutions to address. In that context, I wanted to focus on one in particular, which is to do with urban flooding and stormwater hazards. As I mentioned earlier, flooding is one of the disasters that we see most frequently occurring across the world, especially in our cities, and one that, at least in our area of expertise in the World Resources Institute and with the Cities for Forests program, we are really promoting the role of nature-based solutions for. So there are 5 nature-based solution options for addressing urban flooding and stormwater hazards, which I want to quickly cover, each of which have unique applicability. The first one is open spaces. Open spaces which include natural areas such as riparian areas, wetlands, steep hillsides, and as well as constructed parks and greenways. The next one is constructed wetlands, which are artificial. These are man-made wetlands which are designed to treat stormwater or wastewater. The third is bioretention areas such as bioswales, rain gardens that might mimic natural wetlands. The fourth is green roofs, which roofs partially or completely covered in vegetation, which also are able to capture stormwater and provide a whole suite of co-benefits in cities. And the last is permeable pavements, surfaces that allow stormwater runoff to filter through voids in impervious pavement surfaces into an underlying reservoir or into the ground. All of these urban nature-based solutions absorb and store runoff, but the interventions differ in their ability to attenuate peak flow and to reduce the volume of water entering the built stormwater system. And this is why whenever we think about nature-based solutions and their functionality, it's important to think about the context. I know I'm at about 10 or 11 minutes here, so let me just take a couple more minutes, if that's okay, just to introduce Cities for Forests. Oh. So I just want to introduce quickly how Cities for Forests comes into the picture. And this is the initiative that I work on at WRI. It is a city-led movement to protect forests as a nature-based solution for cities across 3 scales. So Cities for Forests support cities around the world to recognize their interdependence with the world's forests and to use their own political, economic, and cultural power to protect and manage those forests for human well-being. So we help our cities to do this, to manage, conserve, and restore forests at 3 scales. The first is what we call inner forests. These are the city trees and urban parks that are found within a city's jurisdictional boundary. The next is called what we call the nearby forests, which are typically the forests found on watersheds that are important for cities, but sometimes out of their boundaries. And then the third scale is faraway forests. These forests that are typically out of sight and out of mind, such as the world's tropical forests. And the last scale here is particularly important because Cities for Forests is one of the only initiatives working to harness the power of cities to conserve the world's tropical forests, given the outsized benefit that they provide for people who live in cities. Despite that disconnection, the world's tropical forests mitigate global climate change, regulate the global hydrological cycle, which produces rainfall in the world's most important farm belts, which provides food for the centers of consumption, which are in our cities around the world. So right now we have more than 70 cities that have joined the Cities for Forests network, including a couple of cities actually in Turkey. We provide technical assistance and capacity building to these cities to improve city government plans, policies, and management of forests. For example, in recent months, we helped the city of Jakarta issue a couple of new policies on tree protection and management and parks and open spaces. And these efforts include a commitment to grow 200,000 new trees by 2020 to support climate mitigation and adaptation efforts and improve the lives of more than 10 million urban residents who live in Jakarta today. We also facilitate economic analysis, finance, and investment by working to attract and scale financial investment in forests by increasing the literacy of conservation finance approaches, enhancing the bankability of projects, and replicating and scaling novel financing approaches. And so, for example, on that scale, we have worked with cities and their utilities in California to issue the Forest Resilience Bond, which will unlock $25 million of private capital to restore Western forests to mitigate the risk of a catastrophic wildfire, which, as everybody knows, is plaguing the US West year on year. And we're now working to expand this model globally. And finally, we work with cities to inspire political action and engagement by empowering cities, their mayors, and their residents to become advocates for trees, forests, green infrastructure, nature-based solutions at large in their cities and beyond. And to that last point, we just worked with a network of 58 cities, including more than 50 mayors, that recently issued a city-led call to action on forests and climate, calling on national governments, financial institutions, and companies to do more to accelerate action on forest preservation, given the role that, given the benefits that forests provide for cities. I think I'll stop there, Nuri. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. And I mean, forest has lots of opportunities, but also it reminds me how it is dynamic, and it also reminds me how the only constant is the change itself. And of course, we will have several questions, but when it is about change, everything is changing. And here we would like to hear from first Meral and then Stanislav, how UNDP approach is about this. For example, we have the security and resilience nexus 2. And then we will continue, and I remind to attendees again here, please ask your questions to Q&A part. We have already one question. I have a list of questions, but of course I will prioritize your questions, and then hopefully we will have answers to all of our questions. So Meral, would you like to start with the UNDP part? And I think you can share the screen if you will make the presentation.
Hi, colleagues, thank you, and nice to meet you all. And thanks a lot for having us and giving an opportunity to provide you the updates on the UNDP's general approach to climate change and climate change adaptation and resilience. And I will be sharing with you the, I'm sharing with you my screen. Yes, I hope you can see it right now.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, and yes, and sorry, I cannot. Okay, actually, we believe that achieving the sustainable development is only possible with the climate action, and climate change is a cross-cutting development issue that affects every aspect of the sustainable development and the entire 2030 agenda of the SDGs. And scaling up the climate action is essential for achievement of the SDGs. And therefore, UNDP built on decades of experience and has a key role to play on strengthening the capacities of the most vulnerable people around the globe and brokering access to the climate finance, supporting the implementation of climate targets, and bridging the climate and development, operating an extensive organizational infrastructure, and building and maintaining the partnerships and innovation. And as you can see on the screen, I mean, we have tried to provide you the latest figures of the development we have achieved as UNDP, and I mean, you may consider it as the final figures, at least until now, or I mean, this includes the projects or portfolios covering, I mean, has already implemented and that are still ongoing. And if we look at the UNDP's climate change portfolio, I mean, globally, since 2008, UNDP has supported more than 140 countries to access more than $2.8 billion in grant finance to develop and implement climate change initiatives through the climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation, cross-cutting, and forests. And UNDP remains the largest service provider in the UN system with more than 800 active climate change projects and programs in above 140 countries to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and increase the resilience of the impacts of the climate change. And if we look at the results and impacts specifically achieved on under the climate change adaptation action, UNDP advances a whole of society approach to accelerate the adaptation and continuing to support the countries to mobilize private and public finance to implement their adaptation priorities, and therefore supporting the climate change adaptation and resilience are essential components in achieving the goals outlined in the Paris Agreement. And UNDP has supported adaptation activities in 137 countries. This has helped 90 million people until now to build more resilient livelihoods. UNDP's climate promise is the largest offer of support to countries to enhance their nation-determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. And today we are on the ground in 119 countries across the globe, which account for approximately 1/4 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And UNDP supports climate change adaptation action in the context of agriculture and food security, water resources, ecosystems protection, coastal zone management, public health, resilience infrastructure, livelihoods, climate information, and early system warnings. And how is UNDP supporting ambition in adaptation and resilience? If you look, UNDP answers this question is designing to inform climate smart policy and strategy development, and raising and supporting the nations in building national adaptation plans and low carbon climate resilient development pathways that will protect vulnerable populations, and raising ambition through the strategic and operational alignment of global processes, including NAPs, national adaptation plans, national determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, SDGs, and the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And across these priority themes, UNDP's strategy is to accelerate climate action by building the coalitions necessary for transformative change at national, regional, and global levels, by leveraging private sector finance, building public-private partnerships, and also embracing the new technologies and innovations, catalyzing the new approaches. UNDP's offering climate change includes the 3 elements: resilient cities, resilient rural development, and the natural capital. And across the world, UNDP supported projects are generating positive impacts for the millions of people whose livelihoods and lives at risk due to the climate change. And if we look at the impacts achieved so far, farmers are gaining access to new technologies and resources that help promote a better standard of living for their families. And communities are strengthening their resilience to floods, droughts, pests, and other climate-related shocks with improved disaster management systems and smarter ways of doing business. Women who are disproportionately affected by climate shocks are now benefiting from gender-sensitive approaches to adaptation assistance, and the dialogue and capacity building contribute to improved strategies and policies that are helping to build the climate-smart nations of the 21st century. And if we specifically look at the region of the Europe and CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, where Republic of Turkey is part of, and you may see the vulnerability analysis, the figures under the vulnerability analysis, and 1.1 million live on less than $1.90 a day with income, and 6 million are undernourished, and 10.7% live on degraded land, and the expected population increase from 2013 to 2030 will be increased at least $70 million, 70 million people. And UNDP has invested already $278 million in 20 countries across the region, and through the forest cross-cutting teams, adaptation and mitigation. And finally, if I try to mention the key achievements in UNDP support to address climate change adaptation climate change specifically in Europe and CIS region, national policies and processes, and actually 7 countries are supported to prepare intended national development contributions under the Paris Agreement, and climate adaptation and food security. Climate adaptation, UNDP supported national climate risk management policies in agriculture, forestry, and water sectors across Central Asia, and sustainable energy access. over 400,000 people in over 400 cities benefit from UNDP's energy interventions in the region, and low carbon development pathways. Actually, UNDP. I mean, it's specifically if I give you an example, in Turkey, Turkey is being assisted with the funding from the GEF, Global Environment Facility donor, to facilitate a market transformation for more efficient appliances. And under the gender achievement, specifically in Turkey, UNDP provided educational seminars to a group of fisherwomen in Dacia region. Dacia region in the country, and my presentation, and I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Mr. Stanislav Kim, to provide you more details and specific examples of how UNDP implements a project in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miral, Nuri, for invitation. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Greetings from Istanbul. I'm glad to see you all. And this is a really great opportunity to share what we are doing actually and how we are doing. And I get the main problem for all of us, including previous speakers, and for Miral, it was really to present everything in 10-15 minutes. Yeah. Actually, when we are doing, every project which we are doing and implementing out of hundreds which have been presented by Miral, so we can spend like days discussing what we did and how we did and what sort of issues we have. Yeah. And that's why by really accumulating everything in a couple of slides, this is very difficult to see. But in reality, which means that we really work at the different levels. First of all, and UNDP is well known for the policy level, yeah, when we are really supporting national governments with the development of national policies and building certain institutional systems, how to approach both climate change through the prism of the adaptation and mitigation actions, and also contributing to the building of the resilience. Yeah. And actually, I will also share with you we'll show you presentation, but the main idea is really just to provide you with certain materials after this meeting, and where you can refer to it. And I will build it on a couple of examples where projects which we already implemented in this region. Yeah. And I want to touch upon the point of climate change and security and resilience, because this is a new area, relatively new area. And, you know, for many of us, like for decades, climate change was primarily environmental thematic. Then we realized that it's also very much connected with the social economic development and a lot of instruments on the, especially in the area of climate change mitigation being introduced. But then we realized that it's also very much linked with other dimensions, and security, it's one of the most, let's say, important at this stage, especially in our region, and we have a lot of, let's say, consequences and results of this. And I will just demonstrate a couple of projects. One we implemented with the financing, both of them we implemented with the support of European Union. And as you can see, so the topic which we are covering, it's impossible actually to implement in effective way only by the force and capacity of UNDP. And that's why we very much cooperated with our partners within the UN system and with other, let's say, agencies like, for example, OEC and regional environmental centers. And the point which we are promoting right now in this region, it's really to support stability in regions through the transboundary cooperation and adaptation to consequences of climate change. And it's very much depend on the situation in every country, what is going on, and what's not only the climate change trends, but also what is the political, economic, and social situation, and where the climate change can be the really trigger for some sort of security or resilience related aspects. And within this project, actually, and that was the first initiative implemented in this region, we really built it around awareness raising, really to understand the level of knowledge of local counterparts, stakeholders on the issue of the climate change and how it is interconnected with the security considerations. And we build a program of capacity building through the number of trainings, knowledge sharing exchange, consultations, and development of a number of reports, which I will present you later on. And also we really try to discuss it in a forum of transboundary regional, let's say, coordination cooperation manner, considering that everything related to climate change, and especially in the light of security, it's very much in the regional context. It's very difficult to review and address it in a forum of, let's say, nationally specific activities. As part of this project, so we had dozens of consultations in all countries in our region. And in the very end, we developed a number of assessment reports with recommendations and identification of hotspots for the region of Central Asia, Southern Caucasus, and Eastern Europe. And yeah, so all reports are available, and in case if you're interested, we can share it with you, but you can find it through the Google on the website of UNDP and OEC, and it's on the climate change and security hotspots in the sub-regions, which I already described. And that was a very interesting process. First of all, considering that it's not much information. And from the very beginning, we started from the development of methodology, and then it was very much based on the perception and understanding of our national counterparts. And within the, as I said, dozens of national consultations we conducted in the program countries. So we really tried to identify what does it mean climate change implication on security and resilience in a particular country, in a sub-region, and a region in general. So that's why, for example, for Central Asia region, we identify Fergana Valley, which is the most populated area in the region. So as a potential area where the security issues could be a priority in the nearest future, considering certain, let's say, tensions around natural resources, especially water resources between countries, and they need to balance this energy and water nexus in the most effective way. So this project actually resulted in the development of new initiatives, which we recently announced, and just a few weeks ago, we started its implementation in 3 countries, which is Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, with a more focus on a particular analysis of implication of climate change and security and resilience in those countries, and development of certain changes in the policies and institutional systems, how to build it. But considering the high interest of countries, not only to understand and to develop certain policies, but also to test what can be done actually to address all these challenges on the climate change, security and resilience, we also, in agreement with the EU, included a number of elements on the building of early warning system in the Fergana Valley so at the community level. And that was very important for us to work not only on the level of national authorities and I mean, some research institutes and think tanks, but also have a channel of communication with the local community to understand what they think about this thing. And on this slide, you can find some lessons learned which we already have and at this stage and where we can recommend you to consider. And first of all, I mean, despite the fact that the climate change is already on the top agenda for decades, still certain level of awareness raising required, especially to link climate change with some other areas like security and resilience, and also to see what is where the opportunity actually to integrate it better to the national policies to have a certain basement for practical interventions on the ground. Then we should understand actually that dealing with the adaptation and with the climate change and resilience, so it's a long-term commitment. You cannot really expect change much in a period of 3, 4, 5 years. That's why by starting any projects, you need to think actually how to position it, how to develop the overall portfolio or vision at the national level, where the particular project will be contributing to some elements on the way to the building of more resilient society and country. But that's a long process, and we need to consider it not only with the programming, but also with the financial commitments and in building of our partnership and cooperation. So definitely there is a benefit for all countries to connect all these processes with a global, let's say, agenda, such as agenda on the sustainable development, Paris Agreement, Sendai frameworks, because all that you will be doing in the area of building resilience will be contributing to implementation of your obligation. And that's additional stimul for implementation of such actions on the national level. With the risk assessments, as I said, for example, in case of Central Asia, we conducted a series of assessment, we prepared a report, etc. But there is a definitely need for regular update of assessments and update of situation. For example, in case of situation in Afghanistan and all this dynamic which happened in 2021 and previous years. So regular assessment of situation will really help you to understand what is going on and what sort of risk you need to prioritize and how to address. You cannot just rely on one study, which will be probably perfect, but it will be outdated already in a couple of years. So the system of the regular risk assessment need to be introduced, and this is very important, especially by connecting this assessment systems with decision makers, which is the next point, which is required a lot of coordination between different players, between different sectors and levels. So I mean, climate change and security and resilience, this is not a standalone topic here. You cannot really implement it through one ministry, through one sector. This is simply impossible if you really wanted to achieve a sustainable result, which will be building the overall resilience of your society. So that's why coordination in between different ministries, players, levels, this is the very critical element. And unfortunately, we don't have a silver bullet actually how to approach it, and it needs to be developed in every country with consideration of specificity of the political and social economic situation. And corresponding with this, that's multi-stakeholder participation is very critical. And the last point, which probably obvious, but still quite important, it's an ownership of countries involved in this process. Really, it cannot be led by international players, by any organizations from UN, family, or IFIs, etc. We are really supporting you, but in case of practical work, it needs to be really led by the government, by national counterparts, with clear understanding what are the main, final target for all of these interventions. Yeah. What government and country want to achieve in the very end. And we as UN and UNDP really supporting you on this. And the last slide is really just a demonstration of what is going on the ground. This is just a list, very initial list of projects in the same area which are implementing by different agencies or international organizations in the area of Central Asia. So you see that without proper coordination in between all the players working on the ground, that will be not a very effective way how to spend resources and how to support countries. Yeah, and right now, for example, the European Union already established a coordination mechanism to coordinate all initiatives financed by them in a particular sub-region in a particular area. And this is a very promising step, but considering that EU is only one of the donors in this region, so we need to think about some wider coalition where the, as minimum, the proper, let's say, exchange of information will be established, and the maximum where the proper coordination and collaboration will be built upon. So, which means that actually a lot is happening, and I do believe that the same, not only relevant not only for Central Asia, but for some other regions, and we have a regular discussions with our colleagues within the bigger Europe and Commonwealth region, and also at the global level, and we know that all these challenges we are facing. But step by step, with the consideration of all the lessons learned, which I mentioned, and definitely the list could be wider, and I'm limited in a time frame, which was agreed with Nuri. So this is some initial, let's say, information which could be helpful for you to understand what is happening on the ground, what we are doing, and where we can calculate. And I will be more than happy to share with you information both about projects and assessments which we already conducted in the previous years, and we'll be happy to cooperate with implementation, not only this project, but other projects which we are developing. And sorry for being longer than I expected. Thank you.
Thanks, Stas. Thanks a lot. Meral and Stas, thank you very much for giving the approach from UNDP side with some good experience and case studies, especially with another dimension of the issue, the security. And it looks like the climate, energy, and migration nexus will be more relevant in coming years. And it has too much, interrelations with at the dimensional level. But I think the issue is that we are really suffering from disasters. And before we start to recover from one disaster, there is another disaster. And it is where, Emeritus Professor Dr. Nakabayashi will give his speech and presentation about this compound disaster issue from the future perspective, global warming too. So I would like to give floor to Emeritus Professor Dr. Nakabayashi, and then we will continue with the Q&A session. Sorry, you're on mute. Can you please? Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. I would like to presentation in Japanese. And I use the PowerPoint present. こういうタイトルで、お話をさせていただきたいと思います。日本は今、本当に災害の多い、時代を迎えています。地震、気候災害に伴う、雨が降る、あるいは大きな風が吹く、そういう災害だけではなく、大きな地震災害が頻発しています。一方、そうした災害を迎え撃つ日本の社会は、世界トップランナーで高齢化が進展しています。現在もうすでに 28% 以上が高齢者という高齢社会になっていて、災害に対して非常に、軟弱な対応しかできなくなりつつあるというふうに考えています。で、特に高齢化の進行がですね、コミュニティのキャパシティを落としてしまう、あるいはコミュニティ自体を崩壊させてしまう、そうした事態も起きています。特に、農村、山村の小さな集落では、高齢化によって、コミュニティの維持が非常に難しくなっている、そんな状況も見受けられるようになってきました。これは最近25年間の間に起きた大きな揺れを伴う、災害です。皆さんよくご存知の阪神・淡路って、これ神戸アースクエイクです。これが25年前、6年前に起きました。その9年後、同じように強い揺れを伴う地震、その7年後、5年後、3年後とですね、間隔を縮めて強い地震が発生して、日本の西に東に各地で被害が発生しています。こういう災害で、いつもの生活を失う、つまり家を壊していつもの生活ができなくなると、2つの死が待っているというのが今の日本の状況です。一つは災害によって直接命を奪われてしまうという死に方です。それに対してもう一つが震災関連死と言ってますけれども、related death、いつもの生活ができなくなって、シェルターでの生活、あるいはテンポラリーハウスでの生活、仮設住宅での生活、そういう中で高齢者を中心に命を縮めてしまうという事態が発生しています。先ほどのこの表の赤字で書いてあるところが実はそうした関連死でして、80% あるいは 90% が高齢者によって占められています。 地震だけではなくて、その間に毎年のように、気象災害というのが起きています。まさに、気候変動に伴う風水害の災害が日本でも激化しているという状況です。しかも毎年のように起きますので、一つの災害が起きて、それをリカバリーしていく。それがリカバリーが終わる前に再びまた災害に襲われてしまう。そんな事態も発生している。今日のテーマにコンパウンドディザスターって複合災害と言ってますけれども、災害を収める間もなく次の災害に襲われる。そんな状況が今、日本では発生することが危惧されているということです。で、複合災害には大きく2つあるだろうと考えています。一つは左上ですけれども、同じ場所で間隔を短くして2つの災害が重なることによって被害がどんどんシビアになっていくという災害です。最初の災害でちょっと被害だったのが2回目の災害で重い被害になってしまう。そういう事態が発生する。もう一つは左下の一つの自治体の範囲の中で同時に2箇所別々の場所に災害が発生して行政は2つの災害を常にコントロールしながら対応しなければいけない。日本の国家政府でいうと毎年3つ4つの災害に対応しなければいけないような状況が発生しています。で、具体的に3年前にですね、16年ですから5年前ですね、熊本というところで大きな地震災害がありました。日本の震度階で震度7、一番強い揺れですが、これが28時間間を空けて2回ほぼ同じ場所で、起きました。1回目で9人亡くなりました。2回目で41人が亡くなるというような事態で、その後、風水害が雨季になって水害が発生したりして、223人の方が地震の後、復興過程の中で復旧復興の、リカバリーをしている間に、亡くなっているということです。同じように、山村を襲った中越地震という地震では、地震の2日前に台風が通ってたくさん雨を降らせました。山が水ぶくれになって、でそこに強い揺れの地震が起きて、山が崩壊をして、それによってたくさんの人が命を落とす事態になり、2ヶ月後から雪が降り出して、その雪でまた残った家が潰されて、結果的に直接亡くなった方よりも、ここでも高齢者のを中心に関連死がたくさん発生したというような災害です。さまざまな災害が複合するという事態が起きています。もう一つ最近の、コロナの感染下で災害が起きたらどうなるかと。日本ではコロナ禍の災害にどう備えるかということを同時にですね、コロナ対応と同時にさまざまな準備をしました。実際にコロナ蔓延の下で起きた災害はこの2020年7月の熊本での水害でした。で、熊本のガバナーはですね、熊本は先ほどの熊本地震からの復興がまだ終わっていない。その中で水害が発生して、さらにコロナが蔓延していると。トリプルパンチという複合災害であるということを言っています。今、日本の状況というよりも世界の状況がそうですが、コロナが蔓延している中で、 一つの災害がコロナという状況に複合することで、思わぬ被害が発生してしまう可能性がまだ残っているんだということです。これが7月の水害でして、山あいに、たくさんの雨が降って、それが谷筋であふれました。で、どのように、コロナの感染者が、増えたかということなんですけれども、この水色のグラフが日本全国の1日あたりの感染者数を棒グラフにしています。赤い太い線がその中で熊本県だけの感染者の棒グラフです。1週間あたり何人かという棒グラフです。ここで水害が発生しました。その2週間後、3週間後、非常に、感染者数が増えているですね。これはさまざまなボランティアの支援、あるいは行政的な支援、あるいは民間事業者の支援ということで、通常にはない物の動き、人の動きが発生して、そのことによって感染者が増えていったと考えるほかないかなと思っています。さて、そういう、状況に今あるんですが、今、これから日本で最も気候変動に伴う風水害が単独で起きることも大変なのですが、それが大きな地震と重なることが最も危惧されているということです。日本の三大都市圏、首都圏と言っているのが東京大都市、それから大阪、名古屋、必ず市街地に大きな川が流れ込んでいるんですけれども、その川を挟む地域が、海抜の水面の高さよりも低くなっていると。0メートルゾーンというふうに言っていますが、そうした地域が広がっていて、東京では115平方キロメートル、176万人がそこで生活をしているというような状況です。かつ日本での雨の降り方も間違いなく増えています。これは1時間に50ミリという猛烈な雨が日本全国に1300箇所観測ロケーションがあるんですけれども、その中で1年間何回記録されたかという棒グラフを見ていきます。そうすると10年間で29回発生回数が増えてきているというような状況が続いているということです。したがって、これが30年以内に 70% の確率で起きると言われる首都直下、東京直下の地震ですが、その後に台風が発生する、東京を襲うというような事態、あるいはこれは南海トラフというもっと大きな地震、それの後に伊勢湾台風とか室戸台風というような台風が襲う。こういう、コンパウンドディザスターが今一番、備えなければいけない、状況にあるというのが日本の状況です。そういう中で今水害が激しくなってきたということから、従来水害対策として都市計画といいましょうか、ハードには河川管理、川を水害に強くするということで対応してきた。しかしこの20年、特に21世紀に入ってから川の管理だけではもう水害を防ぐことはできないということで、いわゆる流域全体で水害を緩和する、そういう方策に転換しました。日本の大きな川109、それから県が管理しているちょっと小さい川12、合わせて 121の川について、川を整備するのみならず、地域全体で雨を穏やかに川に流す。それによって水害を防ぐ。そんなコントロールをしていこうというふうになっています。その概念としては、川と同時にですね、そこには雨を受けて川へ流すキャッチメントゾーン、集水ゾーンというのがあり、また低地には0メートル地帯を含めて水害を起こす地域がある。その3つのゾーンでそれぞれ水害対策をすることで、行政だけではなく、一人一人の居住者も企業も含めて、すべての人が水害対策に取り組んでいく。そういうような概念での取り組みです。ちょっと時間がありませんので、急ぎますけれども、こういうさまざまな取り組みを集積し、それらを有機的に展開することによって、大きな水害を防いでいこうと、そういう発想です。都市計画的に市街地の中でもさまざまな仕掛けをして、公園の下に水をためる、あるいは公園を低く作ることで大きな雨が降った時にそこに水をためて水害を抑える。さまざまな取り組みが工夫されています。それだけではなく、農地、特に日本は水田、ライスフィールドを持ってます、パディフィールドを持ってますので、ここをダムにしてしまうというようなことですとか、学校のグラウンドも低く作ることで、一時的にそこで水をためて、市街地の水害を防ぐ。こんな多様な取り組みが進められています。また、低いところに立地している市街地あるいは集落については、高台に移転をする、そういう都市計画もやっていこうというような取り組み。あるいは、移転がなかなか難しくても、堤防で集落を囲ってしまうと。そういう取り組みをすることによって、集落には水が入ってこないように守っていく。そういうような取り組みも進められています。また大都市の0メートル地帯といわれる地域では、都市もロングタームのプロジェクトですけれども、0メートルを改善して、盛り土でかさ上げをして、その上に新しく都市を再生していくと。さまざまな土地利用の変換が行われるときに、そういう地盤の高さをコントロールしながら、新しい都市開発を進めていく。そういうことも展開していこうということになっています。首都圏のほとんどの河川の流域で、こうした流域での都市づくりということが進められてきていますが、その実はモデルになったのが、この鶴見川という、少し小さい流域ですけれども、最も人口の多い流域。ここで、上流から下流まで一つのユニットとして災害対策に取り組む。行政だけではなく、居住者も民間事業者も一緒に取り組む。そういうモデル的な検討を20年やってきました。私もこのプロジェクトにずっと関わっているんですけれども、特に2000年に入ってからですね、水マスタープランというふうに言ってますけれども、流域全体でどういう土地利用をみんなで展開することで水害を緩和できるか、あるいは水害を防ぐことができるか、そういうマスタープランに基づいてさまざまな取り組みを展開してきました。いわばこの取り組みを日本の121の主要な川の流域全体での取り組みに展開しよう。これが今進められている気候変動に伴う気象災害へのレジリエントな地域づくりであり、レジリエントな国土づくりということにつながっているかと思います。 こういう小さな流域ですが、人口密度は1平方キロ8000人住んでいると。流域の121の流域の中で最も人口の多い流域、それが実はモデルになりました。ところが、そういう河川対策、だけではなく、そういう河川対策を進めてきているのですが、やはり、降雨が激しくなると水害が発生してしまう。これが水害の予想ハザードマップですね、予想図ということです。この赤いところ白くなっているんですが、実はここにこの洪水をコントロールするために、大きな遊水地というものを作りました。日産スタジアムという、サッカーとラグビーのスタジアムがありました。その周りに、元工場だった敷地を買い取って、川の一部としてここに水を溜めて水害を防ぐというようなことをやっています。これまで2014年、2004年、2019年とですね、3回、大きく、この遊水地に水を溜めることで市街地の水害を防いできました。これが19年のラグビーのワールドカップをやっている最中に発生した台風災害でした。ちょうど日産スタジアムで日本とスコットランドチームの、ベスト8の戦いをするその日だったんですね。で、この水を受けながら、実はスタジアムは、水面よりも上に作ってありますので、台風が通り過ぎて、まだ下は泥水の中だったんですけれども、泥の中だったんですけれども、ラグビーをやり、ました。日本は勝利することができました。こういうような取り組みが今日本での気象災害の取り組みなんですが、先ほど言ったように気象災害の取り組みだけを独立して考えるのではなく、日本では同時に地震災害を考えないといけない。なぜならこれは先ほどの水害想定区域です。水害想定区域というのは過去何回も水害を繰り返した地域ですから、軟弱、柔らかい地盤でですね、地震の時に最も揺れやすい地盤なんですね。ですから水害対策と同時にそこに住むということは地震に対する備えも同時にしなければいけない。つまり流域で治水だけを考えるのではなく、流域でコンパウンドディザスター、複合災害に備える流域こそが自然災害を考える地域づくりのユニットとしてですね、今後は取り組まなければいけないのではないか。だから流域の中の自治体が横に連携して災害に取り組むことによって、上流、中流、下流、それぞれの自然条件に合わせた水害対策があり、また地震対策があり、お互いの相互支援の関係も作れて、より災害に強い地域を作っていけるのではないか。洪水想定区域っていうのは地震の後、液状化現象というですね、泥水、砂が噴き出すということが必ず起きる場所ということです。そういうような状況の中で日本では複合災害にどう備えるか、それを流域単位でやっていくべきではないかということで、長期的、短期的な取り組みについて、こんな取り組み方をですね、していく必要があるだろうということを言ってきています。これからの日本の国土の在り方として、やはりこの気象災害の状況が今後も継続するとすれば、やはり流域ということを単位に、自治体単位ではなく、自治体が流域で連携することによって、災害に強い流域を作り、その連合が国土になるだろうということです。 複合する災害ですから、防災も複眼的、複数同時に対応できる防災を考えていかなければいけない。短期的にはいかに対応するかということになりますが、長期的にはいかに複数の災害に対して、被害を出さない地域を作っていくかということになります。それは実は被災した後、どういう、地域に復興するのか、その時に被災を教訓により安全な地域を目指すんですね。その時に、水害からの復興であっても地震を考え、地震災害からの復興でも水害を考えて、2つの災害に、負けないような地域づくり、都市計画を進めていく。それぞれ単独でやるよりも、2つを複眼的に、プロジェクトすることがコスト的にも非常にパフォーマンスの高い防災の取り組みを進めることができるんではないか。そんなことを今、日本では考えて、進めていこうと。私がここ数年、国内でも、なんていうのかな、プロパガンダ、私がプロパガンダをしている一つのこれからの、レジリエントな国土づくりの基本的な方向です。ちょっと時間過ぎてしまいましたけれども、日本での今の取り組み状況と日本の災害環境の中でいかに、複合的な災害を忘れないで常に備えなければいけない状況があるか。その中でやれることはいっぱいあるんだということをお話しさせていただきました。ありがとうございました。
Thanks a lot, Emeritus Professor Nakabayashi, because this really gives us a very holistic understanding. And frankly talking, I was in another meeting this last weekend, and the issue was about leaving no one behind. And it means that how we will make our climate change action plans without discrimination. And as UNDP always highlighting, climate crisis is an inequality crisis. How we really put the nature and people and prosperity and peace together while we make our resilience planning. And here we focus on the risk-informed development. And the latest presentation we have is really giving a great understanding and even a tool for making the linkages among the disasters and how to make a better planning. And here we always have a dilemma. It's about time. We need to make this whatever revolution you say, but for climate change we need to make a revolution, and it needs to be quick. But on the other hand, it should be also just and fair. And I think the disasters that all we face is one of the biggest issue that we need to consider. And here there is always the issue climate change adaptation versus climate change mitigation. And as UN Secretary General highlights, it's important to also focus, leave no one behind, while we make our adaptation and resilience planning in the same way that we finance the mitigation actions. And of course, there are lots of questions, but there is one question directly to Barcelona. So I think Carmen will be the right person to ask this. I will first direct this question to Carmen, and then I would like to, highlight some issues and we can collectively discuss. And this question is from a person called Dilek. And Carmen, her question is about post-disaster, after the post, I mean, during the post-disaster, how the public buildings can be used with a different way, with a different function, and how it is designed in the building design, construction design. Is there any example you can provide from Barcelona?
Well, not really. Thank you for the question. Not really from Barcelona, but coincidentally, we are looking into this issue of how usually when there's the first emergency, I must clarify that we don't work usually in the first emergency, which is considered the first 4 months, but we're more in reconstruction, but we're aware of them. We're not, I'm not an agency, we're a research group. But we do collaborate with the agencies. And one of the things that has come up, and I really like the idea of the compound disasters that the professor was talking about before, because I think COVID put this right on and all the municipalities' plate, you know, that we have any kind of disasters like flooding, for example, just recently in Germany, but at the other hand, we have the COVID. So one thing that is lacking actually in the field of emergency architecture is this idea of how these facilities that from one day to another are converted into reception centers or first emergency centers. How do we adapt them? How do we retrofit them so that they really are typologies that can be like we could call it like an adaptive typology, an emergency typology. This hasn't been studied that much. And the truth is that this is something we're working on with a colleague of mine of NYIT in New York. And we think it's very necessary. So far, they're just, you know, as you saw during COVID, just stadiums or civic centers have been facilitated just by putting beds, and that's not the way, because the people that have worked in emergencies and related to Ebola, for example, many years, they already knew that these infectious diseases need a certain circuit, a certain kind of functionality of the building. So we have a lot to do. They are being used, but we do need a lot of reflection on how to adapt them. No, so starting from protecting them from the events themselves. No, and very importantly, where do we relocate? I think this is one of the main issues after an event, the relocation, as the professor was also saying. Thanks for that intervention, by the way. It was very interesting to see how you're responding to the diverse disasters. So no, I don't know if I've answered well, but this is something that's pending, because we tend to be to do things in the emergency response that are very quick. We need a lot of reflections on typologies that can be adaptive also for first emergency response. Barcelona is not a city with a lot of disasters, I must say. The COVID, I think, was the biggest one we've had, but other regions of Catalonia or Spain do. So yeah, precisely. Barcelona, by the way, has a resilience plan in place, much related to heat, the increment of heat. So there is a resilience plan and a resilience office in the municipality. So it's something that's, the prevention is there, and I think any public space that is new that should be developed in any of our cities has to have this perspective when it comes to the design, you know, to have it in mind and do a vulnerability assessment before we start designing, something that many architects, we are not trained to do. So I think this is something that many schools of architecture now are starting, I include my own, we're starting to introduce that when we're working on urban design projects.
Thanks, Carmen. Ben, did you raise your hand, or it was a mistake?
No, I did briefly raise my hand, but I took it down again. I was just going to make the same point that Carmen just made then. Okay. There are a number of design guidance manuals that exist in different countries to encourage designers to think about flexible uses of spaces into the future. So one example is from the UK, a few years ago, called Lifetime Homes, thinking about how homes will change through their life and how they respond to different kind of potential climate or other shocks and stresses. And then on the point around examples, I think there are case studies of numbers of buildings in different cities where use has been changed in response to a particular trigger. Some of them were included in the guidance document that I shared in the link here. So I think we can look globally to case studies from cities around the world.
Great, thank you. And Professor Nakabayashi, I mean, you gave the examples and you showed how it is actually relevant and how it works. And you highlighted one part also is about the future perspective, to understand the future possible risks. And, reflecting to this planning, and I just catch one important part, that rather than you plan to riverbed, you start to plan to river catchment area. And recently in Turkey, we had fires, floods, droughts, and they are all top on the COVID issue. And one part also related with Turkey, the migration issue. It is like a bridge and people are moving because of any reason. It can be political or it can be climate related issues. And I'm thinking about how your approach really adapted to other countries, or how do you collaborate at global level with the other countries? It can be an example from Turkey or any other countries. Over.
よくうまく質問のあれが聞き取れてないんですけども、どうしようかな。イナンさんは少し日本語で今の質問を繰り返してもらえます？できます？
Can I repeat the question for translation purposes? Shall I repeat in Turkish or English? So the translation to Japanese would be easier. And my question is about how to make this approach to share with the other countries. Is there an example that you share your experiences with other countries?
多分、どのようにこの流域治水から流域防水という、防水の方法の考え方をですね、他の国に移転できるかということをお聞きになっているんだと思うんですけれども、基本的には我々は我々というか日本ではもう一回立ち返ってみようというのが、なかなか科学技術では自然を超えることができない。だから自然災害に対応する、自然災害から回復できる程度の被害にとどめておく。これがレジリエントだと思うんですけれども、そのためには自分の住んでいる地域の自然条件というものを正しく理解をする。行政もその自然条件ということを行政も居住者、住んでいる人も企業も十分理解した上で、我々が生きている間に起きていない災害が起きるんだということを前提にして、そのイマジネーションを共有することによって災害に備えることができていく。行政だけが防災をやって、居住者が行政に助けられる側に回るのではなく、それぞれがやれることをやっていこうという発想が流域治水に戻した発想だと思うんですね。だからそれには前提として自分たちが住んでいる場所の、ハザードをしっかりと理解をして、そういうハザードといかに、共に生活をしていくか、その考え方をそれぞれが共有して持つことができることによって、それぞれのできることをやっていく。その積み重ねで流域全体が強くなっていく。もし家を建て替えるのであれば、今よりももう少しハザードの弱いところに、より安全なところに家を建てる。あるいは今の自然条件でも建て方を工夫することによって被害を軽減することができる。そうした取り組みを行政の施策だけではなくて、一人一人の居住者、一つ一つの会社がですね、取り組むことによって全体としての被害を減らすことができる。そういう発想にもう一度戻ろうというのが、この流域治水、あるいは流域での水害と 地震にも備える災害に強い流域づくりに向かうんだと思うんです。日本は戦後どんどん被害が減って、行政が財政的にも潤ってきたところから、すべての災害を準備し、我々を守ってくれるのは行政であると、政府であると。我々は何もしなくても守られていく。あるいはもし、被災したら政府が助けてくれるということを信じてきた、そういう傾向がどんどん出てきていると思うんですね。そこに対してやはりそれぞれが被害を少しずつ減らす、その合計が膨大な被害を減らすことになるんですよね。だから一人一人のやれることをやる、そのやれることとは何かをみんなで考え、専門家も知恵を出し、そしてそれを共有して、できることを実践していく。その積み重ねの先に、災害に強い地域ができる。で、特に、気象変動を前提にした防災を考えるときには、雨が問題ですので、流域というのを一つの行政単位として、一つの防災を考えるユニットとして、流域をユニットとして防災を考えていくべきではないかということです。そのことを外国でも共有できればですね、あとはそれぞれの文化に合わせた取り組みをするにしても、そのコンセプトを共有することが大事だし、そのコンセプトをぜひそれぞれの国で作り出していっていただけるといい。最も大事なのは流域という考え方を、特に気象災害を前提にしたときに流域という空間的な単位で何ができるかを考えてみるということが私は大事なんだと思っています。
Thanks a lot. And I think Ben has a question to Professor Nakabayashi.
Yes, I do. Thanks, Yuri. And actually, maybe it talks a little bit to some of the things that John Rob was presenting as well. Professor, I really enjoyed your presentation about compound effects and cascading impacts, and particularly your diagram showing the basins that you are setting aside for green space with transport infrastructure and cities around it. When I looked at that diagram and I saw all those cities, I was wondering about the scale of the planning that's needed to sort of drive that change. And then I was thinking about the points John Rob was making around collaboration. What organization or entity or planning function is there in Japan to drive change at that scale? Because in the UK, we have no regional planning body. So I wondered if that was different in Japan. I hope my question is clear.
流域単位での、計画をするというのは一つの自治体ではできない。流域全体に関わっている自治体がそのプランニング主体となって連合体、共同体を作ってですね、協議会を作ってコミュニティを作って、そこで自治体の代表が集まって議論をして、計画を作っていくということになっています。でそこに河川を管理している国も参加して、流域の中でそれぞれで何ができるかを考えて、マスタープランを作って、でそれをみんながシェアする。で、今日本では、例えば上流の山で、あるいは林で、農地で、降った雨を保留して、川にゆっくり水を流すようにすることで水害を防ごうと。その農地が高齢化で、農地を耕す人がいなくなって放置される。あるいは山の山林も手入れをする人がいなくなって放置される。でそこで水害が起きて、雨が降って、 山崩れが起きると、その流木が土石流となって川に落ちて、それが下流まで流されて、下流でそれが橋ブリッジを壊して下流の水害を大きくするんですね。ですから山の管理とか農地の管理を下流の都市の人がやる。だからそのには NPO とか NGO を含めてですね、さまざまな民間組織が2つの上流と下流を結びつける、そういう人のそのネットワークを作り活動をしていくということの組織体として NPO、NGO の役割っていうのが非常に重要になってきている。下流の自治体では上流からの水を飲んでますから、上流の水を守るための水源林って言いますけれども、水の元になる林、そこを管理するために税金を下流の自治体から出す。そういうようなネットワークで。
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but there is a problem with the translation. So while you answer the question, sorry that we cannot hear it now. So can you just please give the interpreters a little bit time, because this will be the last part of this session. We are almost through, but I really do hope the interpretation problem would be solved. Then we can get this answer. It's a very good question. So interpreters, can you let me know if Professor Nakabayashi start to talk?
たくさん私が勝手にお話をさせていただきましてありがとうございました。地球全体での今コロナが蔓延してますが、まさにこの、気候変動に伴う災害状況というのもコロナと同じように世界全体に関わる災害ですので、これから本当にこういう世界が横につながって知恵を出し合うということが極めても重要になり、それ以外には解決できないのではないかなというふうに思っています。SDGs は2030年を目標にしてますが、さらにロングタイムの取り組みを我々がどういうふうに展開していけるかということが非常に大事だなと改めて思いました。ありがとうございました。
Okay. I'm very sorry that we should finish now, but thanks to interpreters, they did their best and we have some part of the answer. But actually, such meetings are very important to make these connections and learn from each other. So, Professor, believe us, we will keep you in touch and we will keep in touch with you and send our questions online. For the attendees, for the participants, we are very happy that we had this opportunity to share experience and knowledge from the perspective of adaptation for the resilience. We should finish now, but we can continue through emails, and we do hope to meet with another opportunity. And thank you very much for this meeting and your time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.